Thank you, Sarah, so much. And I believe that this session is being recorded. I saw that in the Q&A session. And just a reminder that if you can't hear me, make sure that your computer or phone speaker is selected in the Zoom options here. Okay, and a quick disclaimer, because I don't want you all to sue me. Today, the content is meant to be educational and hopefully entertaining. I don't guarantee any kind of personal finance success, and it's not investing advice. If you do choose to invest, you are investing at your own risk. My lawyer told me to include this. And Sarah did a fantastic job talking about what I do, so I'm not going to go over this whole page, but my mission, my company's mission, Save My Sense, is to change people's money lives forever through showing you the joy of financial freedom. And I am local to Southern California. I actually moved here 2 years ago, and I live now in Huntington Beach, California. I'm a mama too. I've been married 10 years, and then all the other stuff. You can find me on my website, savemysense.com, my Insta, and YouTube. You can tell that I'm a little bit older because I don't have TikTok, but I got reasons for that. Cool. And today I definitely want things to be interactive. I know we're in a webinar format, but myself and the panelists are able to see your questions. So feel free to send your questions both during the content as well as the dedicated Q&A that we have in about, call it 30, 35 minutes or so. I'm going to go over 3 topics, and it is my goal today not to make this boring or mathematical. Because I assume at the very base minimum that all of you guys are in college and you know how to do basic math. But being a genius at math does not necessarily make you a genius at personal finance, because otherwise the richest people in the world should be the Nobel Prize winners for math, and that is really not the case. Instead, what I found in my years of coaching people is that it's actually the mindset that really changes the way that you approach personal finance. So I'm going to go deep on the topic of mindset. And I hope that what you're going to see is going to be super, super relatable. Then, because I imagine that a lot of the attendees are in college, I'm also going to talk about how to get organized with your debt, which probably may be similar to some of the other panelists and other speakers you'll see throughout this week. And I'm also going to talk about how to live joyfully with less, because to get to early retirement, to get to work optionality for me and my husband, we had to be super frugal. And I want to make sure that frugality should not be a shameful topic. It can actually be a pretty fun one. So I found out when writing my book that a lot of people, when they come to me with money problems, I coach people who are, up to their eyeballs in debt. I coach people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to 72 years old. I think is the oldest coaching client that I've had. And no matter their education, no matter what their income, I found that what happens financially matters a lot more with your upbringing than anything else. It has very little to do with your intellect. And if you look at the questions on this page, you can see how these questions are actually highly influential on how you think about and behave relative to personal finances as an adult or as a young adult. How your parents handle money, if anyone talked about money or wealth to you, a lot of people don't have that. Whether your schools taught you anything, there's now been a movement, actually a national movement, to get personal finance as a required course in high schools. What the media you're watching is saying about money, or maybe implicitly showing how people spend their money, the kinds of behaviors you grew up around. And I talk about behaviors, not whether somebody is poor or middle class or wealthy, but there are behaviors that can lead to wealth no matter how much money you have. And most importantly, relevant today, who are the influences in your life today? Whose opinions do you really take seriously? Who do you follow that you're like, oh my gosh, I want to be like that. That's my life. And in writing my book and talking to people who've had a lot of fears, a lot of doubts, a lot of anxiety around money, I found that there are 3 what I call toxic money archetypes that I'm going to publish in my book, Wealth is a Mindset. So you guys get a very, very special preview of my research. And there are good money archetypes too, but because my book is about changing your mindset, I focus on the toxic ones. And they are feast and famine, toxic family, scarce immigrant. You may find yourself in 1 or maybe 2 or all 3 of these. Feast and famine are the families that are typically poor, but also likely have a lot of credit card debt. And so you'll see your lifestyle yo-yoing between having money and spending it, and then not having any money at all and going into more debt. And money is not at all discussed and probably not positively discussed. It's always a source of fear and anxiety. Moving on to toxic family, toxicity can be a range, but I would say oftentimes the people that I work with in this category have had some form of childhood abuse or trauma or both. And most likely money or accomplishment or career, because they're all intertwined, is used as a means to control you. Now, moving over to the scarce immigrant archetype, typically, and the reason why I call it immigrant, because most immigrant families are like this. And I myself, I came from an immigrant family as well. My parents and I moved to the US when I was 10 years old. Your family would typically grow up frugal because immigrants, first of all, don't have much money, and second, can barely qualify for any credit. And so they actually don't live off of credit cards as much as feast and famine families do. They just have to live off of whatever cash they got. And they avoid debt because they can't get qualified for credit. But when money is discussed, and scarce immigrant families do tend to discuss money more often, they'll often favor real estate and stability because a lot of immigrant families come from other countries where the money system is not stable. Think of many Latin American countries, Asian countries, where the government at any point can seize your assets. And so people tend to favor stable real estate stuff that they can touch. And what is this going to do when it comes to adulthood? Now, this is what I observe when these people come to me for help. If you grew up in feast and famine, most likely you're going to have impulsive purchases. And you may not even realize it because feast and famine families, they don't plan. They're buying because there's no money to plan with. So as an adult, even when you have money, you don't spend it intentionally. From toxic families, your self-esteem, your sense of self-love is destroyed. And as an adult, what you're trying to do most of the time is to gain back that love and appreciation. And if you have not addressed this in therapy, which I highly recommend for those growing up in a toxic family, you may find yourself a people pleaser because you want other people to validate you. And so you constantly put other people's opinions and needs above your own. Secondarily, I also see a lot of toxic family archetype people having imposter syndrome. You might be brilliant. You might be fantastic at what you do at your work, but you constantly never feel like you're good enough because growing up, you were told you were never good enough. And so these can be very accomplished people, but who just work themselves to death because they haven't known anything else. If you're from the scarce immigrant mindset, growing up, your parents told you to avoid risk at all costs. So typically I see scarce immigrants avoid risk when it comes to investing. I recently coached a 37-year-old woman who came from such an immigrant family. She had $750,000 sitting in her bank, $750,000 just sitting in a bank account, not invested because she was so afraid of investing. It blew my mind how this problem can compound over time. I'm really glad that I get to address many of you while you're still in college. I didn't have anything like this growing up. I did have the luck of attending a quick webinar held by, I think, our college credit union because I was the treasurer for one of my student organizations. And they wanted to make sure that we weren't taken advantage of as student treasurers. So they told us a little bit about credit and debt, but nothing quite as comprehensive as what your Career Center has put out for you guys today. So as you read through these archetypes and maybe you identify with some of it, you might ask, so how do I change that? Well, the answer is not budgets. It's actually not in apps or any of the what you think are personal finance work. It's actually in mindset work. And based on psychology studies, scientific studies that I read into, I've developed this framework called the Trigger Action Reward Framework that actually literally explains why you suck at money sometimes. So look on the left. When you grew up around these toxic money archetypes, as an adult, you may be triggered. And the trigger is usually a negative circumstance or thought. It can be something that's happening on the outside or something you feel on the inside. And it reminds you of a past failure or defeat or struggle from your childhood. And normally, if you haven't healed that inner child, you're going to feel shameful And to do that, you take an action that reaffirms that belief. You kind of go back to what you felt were the comforts of your childhood, but you don't address the underlying issue. And so while you temporarily feel rewarded, you actually push yourself further into the cycle of failure that your parents set up for you. And so what I actually recommend a lot of people do is to rewire those beliefs where the moment you feel negativity or emotions, by the way, these triggers never go away. We're always going to be triggered throughout most of our lives. But you have the power to change how you react to that trigger. And that means you take an action that moves you towards abundance, not fear, not scarcity. You're going to fail forward and you're going to change your life and be different than what you grew up in. You see yourself as successful and you're less bothered by the trigger over time, and over the time you can close that chapter. Now, I know this sounds really conceptual, so I'll actually share some examples later on from my own life of how I applied trigger, action, reward to start saving very seriously. But let's start with the media that you consume, where you're getting your information, because we are in the world of social media. That's where everybody gets their news. And so that's actually the first place that I attack when it comes to budgeting, is making sure that the information you're consuming is helping you and not hurting you. I'm absolutely a firm believer that what we watch, what we scroll through, the infinite scrolling, the doom scrolling, completely affects our mental health. And studies have shown this. So first, identify and remove the money vampires from your life. Who are money vampires? It can be anybody. It can be a social media influencer, but it can also be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be someone that you sort of kind of know who makes you spend money that you don't have, or makes you spend money on stuff you don't care about. That's a money vampire. And you know what? We don't like vampires. We don't like bleeding ourselves dry with money. So we're going to remove those money vampires from our life because they don't serve our values. And if you don't live life according to your values, why are you living? Then let's put some boundaries around negative media consumption. Now, I work in media and I get it. The algorithms, everything on these social media platforms, they amplify stuff that gets to you. If you read Reddit, and I'm not on TikTok, but I imagine TikTok too, and Instagram, the moment something's controversial or the moment something is just negative or shocking, my goodness, it gets amplified, it goes viral. Same thing for news. Why? Because the business model of media companies is to sell you ads, and they need to sell you ads by keeping you engaged on their platform. And how do you stay engaged on the platform? By consuming stuff that's just crazy, that makes you want to keep reading. But that's why the algorithm is going to favor that kind of stuff. But is that really necessary? I don't think it's all that necessary to always be doom scrolling, to be honest. I keep my news consumption to like 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening for the purposes of my work, and that's it. And so try to think about putting those boundaries on your media consumption as well. And instead of shifting your time, your eyeball, your energy to stuff that can help you towards your goals, whatever they may be, whether it is landing that awesome internship or job, or finding a great significant other, things like that. And listening to the positive voices in your head, because that can change everything. So let's get a little bit more practical. I am going to show a little bit of numbers. I'm going to simplify debt, because debt is probably the first financial question that you're going to deal with coming out of school. And because I am neutral, I don't work for a bank, I don't work for a financial institution. This is what lenders don't tell you about your loans, by the way. For credit cards, they're not going to tell you that making minimum payments is not going to pay off the loan. They just would love to collect on your interest all the time. Your car loan, well, your car's never going to be worth what you borrowed, with the exception of COVID. COVID was some weird times. For student loans, which I imagine many of you may have, with the exception of public student loan forgiveness, most income-based programs are not going to save you money in the long run, because what they do is your standard loan repayment is 10 years. Save, pay, repay, a lot of these income-based programs, what they do is they put you on lower payments, but they lengthen your loan repayment to 20 to 25 years. The government's not in the business of being kind. So what they do by lengthening those payments is that over time in your entire life, you actually end up paying more. towards these loans than if you just use the standard repayment plan. And then 401k loans. If you take out a loan against your 401k, it sounds like a good idea because you're like, oh, it's just borrowing against myself. There's like no interest whatsoever. That's not true though. Most people, when you put money into the 401k, you're saving on taxes up front. But when you repay your 401k, you're doing it with after-tax money. You're not saving on taxes. And that can be 25 to 40% more than what you borrowed in the first place. And not only that, the money that you borrowed is not growing in the meantime. And furthermore, if you leave the company with whom you had this 401k, you might be liable to pay off the loan in full when you terminate your employment. So typically, I just do not recommend taking out these loans at all. But I see 401k loans a lot with young people because it's commonly missold. It's sold by financial institutions to make more money off of you. Everything, all financial products, that's the goal. Their goal is to make money off of you. They're not in the business of being kind to your wallet. So these are 4 things that no matter who you are, what you end up doing, no matter how much money you make, even if you become a multi-gazillionaire, I don't care. These are 4 things you need to do if you want to build wealth, if you want to keep that wealth and change your money story. Even today, I'm a multimillionaire. I still do all these 4 things. First, I want you to track where your money is going. There's a couple of examples that I recommended, but really, it's less so about finding the perfect app or perfect Excel. It's more about being consistent. Just like working out, it's less so about having the perfect workout. It's about being consistent in working out. I want you to spend time on personal finance. For those of you just starting, minimum 1 hour a week. And during this hour, some people, they track their finances. They might balance their bank account, focus on paying off debt, understand a new financial term. You might take a class like this. It's a lifelong journey, something that you're going to keep learning about all your life. I'd like you to maintain an emergency fund. And that's actually the first thing to do coming out of school is to start an emergency fund. In the beginning, it's going to feel like it's really hard going because it feels like a lot of money to have an emergency fund of like 3 to 6 months of expenses. But over time, as you make more and more money, as you save more, the emergency fund feels less and less daunting. I'd like you to use an online high yield savings account like an Ally, Capital One, or Marcus by Goldman Sachs. These are all very reputable online banks that also pay out competitive rates. Right now, with the higher prevailing rates set by the Federal Reserve, we're looking at 4 to 5%. Then I also would like for you to avoid those toxic money influencers. And I'm not talking about a finfluencer like myself where I blog about finances. I'm again talking about the money vampires, the people in your life who influence you either positively or negatively around money. Try to move towards the positive ones. And when it comes to debt, I make things super simple because simple is what leads people to action. If you feel like anything you do in finances becomes complicated, you're probably overcomplicating it. Why? My husband, Mr. Save My Sense, I call him Mr. Save My Sense, always has this phrase. He says, money is fungible. I'm like, can you please be a little bit more plain English? What he means by that money is fungible is money. Yes, it can look like a savings account. It can look like credit card debt. It can look like your paycheck. It can be in a 401k. It doesn't matter. It's money at the end of the day. And if you see your money as fluid, it's all one pot. You just got to be as prioritized as you can be with your money and your time. Then you've simplified down what personal finance is for you. For those of you who are thinking about debt, the number one mistake that I see a lot of people have when thinking about debt is they're like, I have car loan, student loans, mortgage later on if you buy a home, credit card debt. And you get very frustrated because you're like, there's like so many things and they all look so different. I don't know how to think about them. My friends, ignore the labels. Forget about whether it's credit cards, student loans, car debt. The only thing I want you to pay attention to is the interest rate. Mathematically, the higher the interest rate on a loan, the faster growing that loan is. And therefore, the loans with the highest interest rate is what you pay down first. That's it. So yes, there are some people with 2% student loans, and there's people with 8% student loans. It doesn't matter. It's the 8% that I care about. I don't care if it's a student loan or credit card loan. So, but to make it a little easy for you, there is this diagram. Basically, debts with 10% or higher interest rates, those are what I call toxic debts. After you saved 1 month bare bones emergency fund, because I still need you to have some savings to prevent you from falling into any further debt, pay off all these debts early. Throw as much money as you can. All money is fungible. Every extra cent you've got, you throw it towards these, you pay it off. Then once you're done, breathe a little bit, celebrate, save 3 to 6 months of emergency funds, because now your debt's a little bit more stable. If your employer offers retirement match, not all employers do, get that. Once you do that, then pay off all loans in this category, so in the 5% or more interest early. Because again, 5% is pretty high interest rate still. Not as bad as 10, but it's still high. Then once you paid off all these debts, woohoo, we can celebrate again. Then I actually don't need to see you pay down the rest of your debts early. And we're talking about less than 5%. This is usually mortgage loans when the interest rates were good. And that's because by this point, your money is a lot better off growing on the market. The stock market on average returns you about 8 to 10% a year. If you have an extra dollar and you put that dollar towards a debt of like 3% interest rate, that means you save 3% rate charged on that dollar for the rest of your life. But if you put that dollar on the market and you make a 10% return, that 10% return is enough to afford you to pay off the debt and also grow some money. So therefore, again, it's all about growth rates. You always flow your money to where the highest rates sit. And that's why at the bottom, I do flip-flop and say, well, you have debt of less than 5%, you do not need to be in a hurry to pay that off. I actually have a mortgage. I'm not in a hurry to pay that off either. That's my mortgage rate is like, I don't know, 3.75%. I think that's what it is. Okay, alrighty. So let's get to talking about living joyfully with less. I did see a question that is pretty relevant to what I just said is somebody said, if you have a lot of things to track and it's easy to fall behind, what are tips if you miss 2 to 3 days of logging transactions? Increase the time you have towards personal finance, because at the end of the day, you need to track. Now, there are tools that can help you, but the thing is, the more you track, just like when you track what you eat, when you track your workouts, when you track your sleep, that data is gold, and it's data that powers our lives to be better. And so if you skip tracking, you don't know where your money goes. So I'd like for you to do that. Okay, so how did I implement trigger action reward? For me, to know a little bit about my personality in my 20s and early 30s, I'm a very social person. I went to schools where I made a lot of friends, and I lived in New York City coming out of business school. And I mean, it is a dream city to live in. It's fun, it's got good food. I wanted to be social. I wanted to experience fun things, have nice things. And I hate to be alone. I'm an extreme extrovert. So for me, a lot of my triggers come around either feeling like I'm alone or in some cases, feeling like I'm not doing well at work. And so those are my triggers. And in the past, my actions to address my feelings of loneliness or feelings of inadequacy when it came to work was to eat out, to have fun, buy new clothes, and decorate my room in a nice way. And so when I had to meet this very ambitious goal, my husband and I set this ambitious goal of living off of the lower of our 2 incomes while living in the heart of Manhattan. I mean, that is not something that you can just wave your hand and say, I'm going to do that. That requires like planning, it requires sacrifice, it required work. So to give you real numbers, at the height of our savings rate, my husband and I both worked. We lived in the heart of Manhattan, and together we were able to invest, put away into our retirement accounts, into our investing accounts, more than $100,000 a year by being super, super frugal. And that's the level of commitment to get to early retirement in my early 30s. So everything had to look different. I taught myself how to cook And I realized my trigger is either I'm hungry or I crave social outings with my friends. And I realized my action, I don't have to go out and eat. I can cook food. I can host potlucks. Say, yes, it's a humble IKEA coffee table. I didn't even have a dining room table. I had an IKEA coffee table that I bought off of another friend, and I like hiked it up back up to our apartment via the subway. Like legit, I was one of those people that probably ended up on Subway Creatures with, a piece of furniture in the train. And I realized my friends didn't really, my good friends really didn't care all that much. They they were happy to be able to hang out. I wanted to have fun, but dang, I didn't have the money to go to all the shows in New York, all of the fun pop-up experiences. So I did a lot of walking around New York, just enjoying the cityscape. I'm a photographer, so I took a lot of pictures of sunsets. And now that I've left New York for 2 years, I miss that. I'm like, gosh, that was a fantastic city to live in. I really got to enjoy and have fun during those years. I worked in fashion. Sarah mentioned that I did work for Victoria's Secret, and in the world of fashion, you're very much judged for how you look, for better or for worse. And so also working in media, you're judged too. But then I realized people actually don't really remember what I wear like 2 days in a row. So I learned to have really professional, well-fit clothing, but I bought a lot of the stuff used. Um, Consignment and stuff, and or hand-me-downs traded from friends. And I would take bathroom selfies when I felt good, because I'm like, let's just remind myself that I am capable at my job and I don't have to wear the latest fashion to do that. In fact, the bathroom selfie that you see on this page was taken on the day when I presented to the then CEO of Victoria's Secret. Now, Victoria's Secret is its own hot mess. You guys probably have seen the documentary about it. I'm not gonna address that. But you make do with what you got. So what are other ways that we did a frugal, joyful life? If you can, rent and have roommates and housemates. Really cut down on your housing costs, because it's just one bill. But this one bill can literally mean the difference between saving $1,000 a month or more. Like this is where, either you make a ton of little changes and you're miserable all the time, or you make one big change and you learn to deal with it, but it's good enough. And that was the crazy rent stabilized apartment that my husband and I lived in. Was it nice? No. It was a horrible landlord. Not good. It was 420 square foot. I'm probably not much bigger than the size of this office that I'm in right now, but we made do. I pared down my belongings so that whenever I did need to move, and I moved cross country a lot during my career, I could just ship everything via FedEx and UPS. I never hired movers, never had a pod or anything. You can pretty much up and move, and that cut down and allow me to be flexible. I didn't own a car until 37 years old. I know that's not possible in Southern California. I have a car now, but if you can wing it, and in some large cities you can pretty much get to most places using public transportation and then sometimes taxis and Ubers. I did this in Boston, San Francisco, New York City, and Chicago. LA is probably the only one where this is not that easily done, unless you lived in like Santa Monica or something. Cooking. My first year of cooking was, I call it the year of burnt everything. Like I burned everything. But it doesn't take a genius to cook. It doesn't take a genius to put together, a sandwich or adult charcuterie. And also, I cut back on fancy seafood, steaks, because those proteins are really high cost. And a lot of frozen food is just as, if even not more, nutritious than fresh food, because veggies and fruits are often frozen right when they're harvested. So it locks in a lot of those nutrients. And also, I just avoided alcohol, juice, soda, teas, and coffee, and that cut down a lot. Pretty healthy too. So, and then if eating out, my husband and I now still do lunch dates instead of dinner dates to save money. And now we don't do this, but we used to skip alcohol, appetizer, sides, and dessert. For clothing, I love fashion. I do. I do like pretty clothes, but I was one of the early adopters of a capsule wardrobe in the US. And that meant I had about 30 pieces of clothing for a season. And I often swapped, borrowed from my friends. I bought a lot used, eBay, Poshmark, Facebook Marketplace, you name it. And then later on, as an influencer, I also get some free clothes and also working in fashion, you get some free clothes too. But by and large, these days, I still keep a very small, edited, but highly fashionable wardrobe. And so that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. So feel free to start sending questions in the Q&A. I do see a couple of questions up already. And I have 2 freebies to hand to you guys as well. So you can take a QR code and download them. The one on the left is the No Spend Challenge, which is basically a 6-day free challenge that incorporates a lot of stuff that I teach to help you audit your spending and help you identify ways to save hundreds of dollars a month. So this is a freebie that makes you money. And then on the right-hand side, if you do have student loans, there's a guide that I go into much greater detail into how student loans work, how to think about repaying student loans, how to stack them, and things like that. Okay, Sarah, so I think I'll pause on this page a couple more seconds and I'll flip to my contact page, and I think we can start teeing up questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Shang. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A, and so feel free to add more in the Q&A. I will just go through as many as we can in the next couple of minutes we have here. So a student is asking, if you pay yourself back on the 401k loan, is that a better option?
I'm not sure what it's being compared against. In general, I would say avoid taking out 401k loans altogether. But if you have that loan, it's actually, and people don't realize this, it's one of the most expensive loans you could take out. So I would recommend that you pay it back as quickly as you can because of that hidden tax differential that you don't see.
Okay, and the next question is just on high yield savings account. Student is asking if you can just expand more on what a high yield savings account is and how to best utilize that.
Of course, if you use a brick and mortar bank like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, you open a run-of-the-mill savings account, they barely pay you any interest, like maybe, I don't know, 0.01%, like something really laughable and sad. However, online bank accounts, basically banks with no physical branches, are able to save a lot more on overhead. They don't have real estate costs, and they pass these savings to you, and they can peg their interest rates closer to the prevailing interest rates set by the Federal Reserve. So interest rates in this country are not constant. They move up and down primarily due to the Federal Reserve, who are trying to keep our economy functioning and not crashing. Right now, because of high inflation we've had in the last couple of years, we also have high interest, which is good for savers. Not so much for borrowers, but it's great for savers. And I would strongly recommend one of the couple of high yield savings account providers that I mentioned, and I can just go back to the page that had that. Where is it? Ally, Capital One, Marcus by Goldman Sachs. These are all really good ones. There are other ones too, but pick one that you like, stick with it, put your money, put your emergency fund in there, and then don't worry too much about it going forward.
Great advice. Going off high yield savings account, a student is asking, how much should we put in one?
Your emergency fund. So once you have finished saving for your emergency fund, and let's again use this the waterfall. So the first emergency fund, the baby emergency fund, is 1 month of like bare bones expenses. So once you've cleared the 10% debt, then it's 3 to 6 months. Beyond that, for most young people, I don't see the need for you to have any more in savings unless you're saving up for something specific like buying a car, having a wedding, or a really big vacation. Basically, anything that you might need money in the next like 3 to 4 years, you keep that in the savings account. But money you don't need to see until you retire, that all goes to retirement accounts like 401ks, IRAs, which I didn't touch on here, but I think you guys might have like other investing panels that will go deeper into those topics.
Yes, we do have a couple investing panels for sure. But if you were willing to and able to touch upon it, we do have a few questions in the chat about what is a 401k and what is an IRA. So are you able to just quickly tell us briefly what it is?
Absolutely, and I actually have a easy to read slide that will probably make all this a little bit clearer to you. So basically, to summarize, the United States financial system can be kind of complicated because our tax code is really complicated. And as a result, we don't just have one kind of account that allows you to save and invest. We have many types of accounts because some of these accounts give you an advantage, like a tax advantage over others. Basically, like when you get your paycheck, you're like, awesome, I'm making $50,000 a year. Oh, wait, I don't get paid out $50,000 a year because the government eats up a bunch of taxes. You have federal taxes, you have Social Security, Medicare, state income tax, and some lovely cities love to charge their own city tax. So that being said, a lot of people want to find ways to lower those taxes. And that's why there's these accounts with a mumbo jumbo of names, but it's actually really, really simple. And it's a 401k and equivalents. There's actually 403b, 457b, and TSP. 403 and 457 usually offered by nonprofits, and then TSP is the federal government equivalent. Then you have the IRA, then you have the taxable brokerage. Easiest way for me to explain is moving all the way to the right, taxable brokerage. You go to a financial institution, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, you say, I want to trade stocks today. Let's open an account. That's a taxable brokerage. Why is it taxable? Because it has no tax advantages. You put in money and it's already after tax. You invest it and it pays out dividends. You got to pay some taxes on those dividends. And let's say your stocks go to the moon and you got a lot of like gains, you get taxed on those gains. So that's the taxable brokerage. These two types of accounts give you an advantage. The 401k and its equivalent is offered by your employer. If your employer doesn't offer this, your luck is kind of out. And it offers a tax break in that you can either put in money now and save on taxes now. It's called tax deferring, or you could pay taxes, put in the money now, and then it grows tax-free. There's some more details around this. I have a class that teaches this, and I want to be sensitive to how much. Oh, we actually have plenty of time. So basically, from your paycheck, you can put in up to $23,000 a year into the 401k. If you're age 50 and over, you can put in another $7,500 because they recognize old people need to prioritize their retirement savings and catch up a little bit. Penalty-free age. This is basically because these accounts are designed for retirement. If you withdraw the money before age 59 and a half, you pay a 10% penalty. And then the last two things are details you don't need to really know right now. It's not important. IRAs are retirement accounts that you can open yourself with a financial institution like Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab. And they function similar to a 401k in that you can put in money and defer taxes on it right now. So tax deferred or traditional, or you pay the taxes right now, but it grows tax-free. That's called Roth. Your limit each year right now is $7,000. If you're age 50 and over, you can put in another $1,000. There's some workarounds around this penalty-free age. Again, not super important right now, but if I were you, and I'm starting a job, and once I've fully funded my emergency fund, it is my strong recommendation that you take advantage of the 401k if it's offered and open your IRA, because these are major wealth building vehicles. And because they save on taxes, I'll just give you a number. Let's say you hope to have $2 million in retirement. If you were to use the taxable brokerage, the taxes could eat up like 20%. So instead of 2 million, you can have $1.6 million instead. Whereas if you use the 401k or the IRA, you are tax shielded, and that tax shield could mean a $400,000 difference by your retirement age.
Great, thank you for going over all of those details. We do have a few questions about spouses and partners and relationship with money. So a student or an alumni is asking, how do you get a spouse on board to save and plan for the future?
Yeah, that's tricky because had I what if I were able to meet you before you got married, I would say really make sure that you guys are on the same page when it comes to finances, because it's one of the top reasons why marriages break up. That being said, you're already married, and I want to save your marriage. So just start talking about it and try to talk about it in a neutral space, because it's very easy to start fighting on a topic like this. My husband and I, our money hour, I call it the sexy money date. Like, make it sexy, have your favorite beverage of choice, play some good mood music, give each other shoulder rubs, whatever. But I want you to make it a positive experience and talk about what goals you guys share together. Like, always focus on what does your spouse want and what do you want, and can there be a overlap between them and work towards that. Because if you focus on your differences, you will never be able to get each other on board. Everyone in a relationship is always going to approach money a little bit differently. I call my husband the frugal cheapskate. He's a little bit cheaper than I am. And I'm more of the risk taker in the relationship. And that will never change. But you guys need to start talking about money. And each of you can have your own strengths. So if you find that you're better at managing the money, maybe offer to manage your combined money together. And maybe your spouse is stronger at something else and they can do that.
That's amazing. Another student or alumni is asking, what if you and your partner both have student loans? Do you have any recommendations on how to deal with that, or maybe signing a prenup?
Yep. So before you're married, I would consider your student loans your individual problems. Each of you are going to figure out what you're going to do when it comes to paying down those loans. As for my opinion about prenups, there's my financial finfluencer opinion, and then there's my private opinion. My finfluencer opinion is this: regardless of whether you have a prenup or not, the state in which your marriage was founded has its own prenup already. Like if you were to divorce in a California court, they have their own ways of dividing up your assets. So it's really what if you don't want to follow the state's laws, then you create your own prenup, and then both of you need to retain your own counsel to do that. My private view is I think that if you choose to dedicate your life to another person and you hope to do so for life, your finances should be combined, with the exception of one, you're actually in an abusive relationship, so then you shouldn't combine finances. Two, if you have children outside of the marriage, there's money that needs to go to that child specifically that shouldn't go to your spouse. Three, if we're talking about family money, usually this is inheritances and stuff, that money should be separate. And four, if there are businesses in which your spouse is absolutely not involved, or businesses where you have outside partners. I think those are the four exceptions that I would take to combine finances.
Thank you. We're going to continue with questions on debt. And so student is asking, I've been hearing that some people have gotten their student loans forgiven. Do you have any info on this or any thoughts about the possibility of student loan forgiveness or just how to manage debt in general?
Student loan forgiveness is a political tool. Remember that it's a political tool wielded by whoever is in the White House or whoever's in Congress to buy your votes. Why would anyone of their right mind pin their future hopes on politicians? I don't think so, but that's my political opinion. So I would say always assume that your loans may not be forgiven, but take advantage of any program that's offered to you. We want the best of both worlds here. We want to operate as if you're going to pay off these debts, but we're also going to take advantage. I have a lot of coaching clients who work for the federal government, work in teaching jobs. That's the public student loan forgiveness program. You work in these jobs for 10 years, make 120 qualifying payments, the remainder is forgiven without taxes. Some people have these pay, save loan structures where you have the lower payments. But I get a lot of people off of those plans because I'm like, long term, you're going to end up owing taxes on some of these. Save plan doesn't do it, but some other forgiveness plans do. So like I said, we don't know what the government's going to do, but for sure, Biden dangled student loan forgiveness to buy loans. So to buy your votes.
All right. A student is asking, are there any types of debt that are worth taking?
Any kind of debt that's not worth taking.
That are worth taking.
Are worth taking. So in the wealth world, people would say that debt is leverage. What do they mean? Leverage means that you take on a cheap loan to invest in something that's going to have a lot of return, such that you don't need to put a lot of money down, but you can make a lot of money off of it. That's exactly what a mortgage does. Very few people can have all their money up front to buy a house. I mean, that's rare. That's very, very rare. So most people take on mortgages, and historically, not now, but historically, mortgage loans have had really low debt. And that's what people are like, hey, I'm going to make 8 to 10% in the stock market. I'd rather invest there and not save up all this money to buy the house. For me, I don't see money in good or bad terms. Like I don't assign an emotional value to it. I don't assign, oh, like debt is good or debt is bad. I don't even think that people who have debt should see themselves as bad people. In fact, a lot of people have this attitude where they're like, I have debt, so I must be really bad at money. I'm like, no, especially if you're first gen, if you came from a family that couldn't afford your school tuition, this is your ticket. Like you had to take on student loans to, exit whatever situation you came from. So for me, it's all about just plan for repayment, avoid very high interest rate that you cannot afford, and just be very, intentional about where you want your money to go.
Great, thank you. Another student is thanking you for all of these helpful tips and asking, what did you say were the interest rates for banks with no physical branches when opening a high yield savings account?
Right now, they're hovering between 4 to 5% annual interest rate. And a great resource, I realize I can type in the chat now. I'm going to just put down a link that I love. This is a website, bankrate.com. They actually have their editorial staff test out different high yield savings accounts, look at most current offers. They share about the pros and cons of each type of account. So it's a great review site to find a high yield savings account that you like.
Great. Another question still on the topic of high yield savings account. A student is asking, between HYSA and CDs, which do you recommend? What are the main pros and cons between them?
Yep. So I cannot predict the future, but basically if you choose between a CD, a certificate of deposit, versus HYSA, high yield savings account, high yield savings accounts interest rates are not guaranteed. They move up and down based on what the Federal Reserve is going to do. And the Federal Reserve does publicly announce the new interest rates every month. A CD is a contract where you lock in a certain amount of interest for anywhere between 9 months to 5 years to 10 years. And so if you pick a CD, you kind of have to lay the pros and cons of, do you believe that this is the right interest rate to lock down? And also, are you okay with your money kind of staying stuck in that CD for a long time? Or do you want the flexibility of a high yield savings account, but it also comes with the risk of the interest rate moving up and down?
Great. And someone is asking about investing. I know we'll have an investing session later on in the week, but I want to see if you want to answer this question or if you're able to. For someone who is scared to invest in the stock market because I have a fear of losing it, what do you recommend I should look into for my first investment?
Yeah. So by law, I am not able to provide investing advice, but I can speak to your fear because it's a very, very common one. And it's most likely that you feel that fear because, again, media likes to amplify negative news. The stock market goes up and down on any given day, but most people tend to make note when it goes down and not so much when it goes up. In fact, since the beginning of the year, the stock market has been up at least 25%. And so I'm going to share another piece of compelling evidence that shows why investing in the long run does make money. So first, I'm going to explain what an index fund is. An index fund allows you to buy the stock market all at once. An index fund basically takes all the stocks in a given index. It could be the S&P 500, it could be the whole US stock market, it could be the European stock market, yada, yada, yada. And instead of you having to go buy 500 stocks, which is very, very tiring, you buy one fund and they do all the transactions for you. If you look at the last, call it almost 40 years of history of the stock market, yes, it goes up and down, but overall it goes up. And the evidence here is you guys are hopefully watching this in your 20s. You have the one gift that I don't have, which is the gift of time. The earlier you start, the more time you have for your investments to recover. And I had a friend who actually ran a Monte Carlo simulation. Basically, he downloaded all of the stock market data and he did hundreds of thousands of simulations where like you enter at one point in time, you exit at another point in time. He found, and this is based off of real data, that after 5 years, your likelihood of making money in a stock market is more than 95%. After 10 years, your likelihood of making money in the stock market is 99%. I mean, those odds are better than going to the casino or buying the Powerball. The other piece of evidence that I want you to consider is actually also public. It's called the SPIVA scorecard. The SPIVA scorecard is basically the public institution that tracks the S&P 500 and many other index funds. And they look at those funds and they also compare it against actively traded funds, which are funds managed by professional traders. They found that in the last 15 years, more than 92% of actively traded funds underperformed the S&P 500. In fact, Warren Buffett pointed out this problem as well in the 2000s. He's like, for most Americans who are not trying to be, an aspiring billionaire like him, because he's a professional investor, if investing is not your main job, he says basically you're not going to be in that much trouble by buying an index fund, because the underlying thing that supports an index fund is hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. And just think about why people hate being a corporate cog so much. It's because people get worked to death in corporate companies to make money for their shareholders. And so when you buy the stock market, you're buying the hard work of corporations who exist to serve their shareholders. And that's just me being blunt. But I'm like, when I think about it that way, I think the stock market completely crashing, going to zero, has never really happened. And if it did, I think we all have a lot more bad things to worry about, like maybe an alien invasion or something. So
Thank you, Shang. So we have one general question about emergency fund plans. Could you quickly go over that once more for the student who has questions?
emergency fund. Okay, like my flow chart.
Yes.
Okay, let me find that page. Okay, so if you have debt with 10% or higher interest rate, save just 1 month bare bones and then pay off those debts. Then once you clear those debts, save 3 to 6 months emergency fund. There's no hard and fast rule here, but anywhere between 3 to 6 months is enough to cover a job loss. Then you pay off debts with 5% or more interest. And then after that, you can split your time between pay off your debt on time and investing for retirement.
Okay, great. And then we have another general question as well. What are some software recommendations you have for automating tracking, aside from Excel? Any sort of platforms or software that you recommend?
Yeah, so for budgeting, youneedabudget.com and UseMuch app are, I think, people's most preferred ones. And then also for tracking personal wealth, let me think if I think it's Personal Capital that still does this. Personal Capital, I think, is still a somewhat free software that can log on and you can connect your bank accounts and it will track that for you. Some of the financial institutions, I think Fidelity does this, Vanguard maybe does this too, where they can also link up to your existing bank accounts and help you track your net worth. For me personally, I tend to do it more manually just because, first of all, I don't like linking all of my stuff together in the cloud. It just pricks the privacy side of me. And also I just like tracking it manually because I think it helps to be informed about all of my investments as well.
And we have another question about 401a. If you can tell us what the difference between 401a and other retirement plans are, that would be great.
Yeah, 401a are plans where if your employer offers a guaranteed match. So like matches are never are not required by employers, but some employers will say no matter what you do, we'll always give you 5% of your salary into a retirement plan. And some other employers will say, we'll match you 5% if you also contribute 5%. It's the, if we give you 5% no matter what, that just legal structure, I don't write the laws, I don't know why, but they put that into a 401a account for legal reasons. It's different from a 401k, and it's not something that you personally contribute to. Like for you to put money from your paycheck, it would be to the 401k side of things.
And then as a final question, how do we develop our own trigger action strategy?
Yeah, I love trigger action reward because it's literally personalized to your situation. So you know that there are actions and behaviors that lead to good financial outcomes, and there's actions and behaviors that lead to bad ones. The easiest way for me to explain it to you is this. What is the underlying psychological need that you're trying to meet when you have a trigger? For me, when I get lonely, when I get down about myself, ultimately I want community. I want relationships. I want to be with friends. My old habit, my old action was, oh, to have friendship, that means I need to go out and eat and pay for, a really expensive meal in town because I didn't know anything else. All my friends did this. But then when I realized actually the real reward that I'm seeking, the reward is not let's go out eat and blow $100 on dinner with my friend. It's let's see my friend and maybe we'll have some good food. And so my action is I'm going to see this friend, but I'm going to spend less money doing so, but still get to the same result, which is the reward is I am feeding my soul with my friendships.
Awesome. Well, that concludes the Q&A. I know there was also more questions about investing and taxes as well. Taxes we'll cover on Thursday, so please stay tuned for that. Shang, if you can please bring back the slides from the
Yep.
previous workshop, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I am primarily on Instagram. So if there are follow-up questions, feel free to email me, info@savemysense.com, or DM me on Instagram and tell me that you came for the USC session. And I can try to address those later when I find time. Definitely love all the engagement in the questions. This is great.
Awesome. Thank you. A student did ask if they can connect with you on LinkedIn. Is that okay with you, or do you prefer all of those other social media platforms?
Social media, please. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So I do want to let you all know, again, this is our schedule for day 2 tomorrow. We'll be talking about first generation students and first generation experiences. So we have a panel, a workshop, a first generation credit workshop, and then we'll also be talking about investing. And we'll be going through a series of investing throughout the week. And then if you go on to the next slide, I do want to encourage you all to participate in filling out our post-session survey. So once you fill out the survey, you'll be entered into an opportunity drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card or Apple AirPods. And if you have any questions about the conference, please feel free to email myself or careers@usc.edu. And again, if you have any questions for Shang, you can also reach out to her on our social media platforms. Shang, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. It's been a great pleasure.
And thank you everyone for your engagement. And we always end by saying, fight on. Bye everyone.